On today's Palace of Pistons podcast, the Detroit Pistons are now buyers at the trade deadline. We'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about Cade Cunningham and the national spotlight that is finally reaching the former number one pick and Detroit Pistons star. All of that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Detroit Pistons fans, we are back for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. It's myself, Eric Johnson, and battling it out to be with me this week is Jasper Apollonia. And we're here in probably maybe the most optimistic slash best moment in franchise history in terms of since this podcast's existence, all the way back in, what was it, 2016, 2017. The Detroit Pistons are 21-19. They are a playoff team as of this recording. They are trending in an absolute blazing direction. The national spotlight is shining on them. It just feels like this is a pivotal moment in the current story of the Detroit Pistons. You can feel a shift in the energy around this team, not just from within, but on the outside. The local attention from fans, the local respect, and that national spotlight picking up around this team as they just continue to improve and play better basketball led by Cade Cunningham. Jasper, you joined the podcast 3, 4, 5 years into its existence. I mean, it's definitely the best it's been since you've joined the show. I mean, the energy, the feeling around this team, it's palpable right now.
Well, first off, Aaron, I do want to say thank you for acknowledging that I'm sick. I don't want to, offend anybody or hype myself up too much, but I would say I'm probably braver than any troop that's ever lived. So I would say based on that, and the reason I know that is because I did the math on this. It's so funny you brought up, I've been on this podcast for about 4 years now. I was thinking about this last night. Aaron, this is only the second time I have hopped on this podcast where the Pistons have had a record above 500. It's only the second time it's ever happened. Last season, when the Pistons were 2-1, we had a podcast. This is the only other one I've done where the Pistons have had a record over 500. Incredible.
Has it been our fault this whole time? Man, I just it's surreal. Like it just feels so much different right now compared to where everyone was at last year. I mean, at this point last year, every week it was just so dreadful hopping on to record a podcast to just drown our sorrows. I mean, it was such a disappointing team. And it was such a disappointing season. It felt like last year was going to be a season where the Pistons at least started to make a little bit of a leap, and they did quite the exact opposite. And for this team to have turned it around as much as they have this year, it's just been such a incredible thing to watch. We're going to talk about this hot streak that the Pistons are on, the national spotlight that the Pistons are receiving, and what it's meaning for this Pistons future that's reportedly changing with the trade deadline looming just 3 weeks away. But before we get into all of that, I want to give a word to our weekly sponsor, and that's BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. We were talking about we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different lines, betting lines surrounding the Detroit Pistons right now. We're going to talk about them throughout today's show, but I want to hit on this one first. As of today, January 15th, on Bet Online, the Detroit Pistons are minus 180 to make the NBA playoffs. If you would have told me back in August that this Detroit Pistons team was going to end up being a favorite to make the playoffs at any point in the season, I would have called you crazy. I think we said last year, or I think we said at the end of the offseason, and I know I brought this up a few weeks ago on my solo podcast, I said 60 would be a miracle for this team. It would be like the peak of this team's ceiling, like everything going right. And yet Detroit is the 8th seed right now at 21-19. But as the 8th seed, they're only a game and a half out of 4th in the Eastern Conference. This is with losing Jaden Ivey 2 weeks ago. They've been red hot even with losing Jaden Ivey. And they're just headed in such a strong direction, it appears. I mean, I know we have a lot to talk about today, but Jasper, just like opening it up here, like what the hell has been going on with the Detroit Pistons as of late?
It's incredible. I mean, this is a team that had their preseason over-under set at 24 and a half games. And we were looking at that. And for the record, we both took the over. Okay, folks. So don't even try and go back and say, oh, you guys, blah, 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 front runners. No, we took the over. We got a little scared because 97% of the money happened to be on the over in Vegas. That's always a scary proposition, but we were right. But the fact that we are in mid-January, Aaron, and the Pistons are now 4 wins away from hitting that over. And look, they have a 5-game road stretch coming up very soon, but it really does look like they are going to hit that over by the time February rolls around. And if you had told me that, I would have been absolutely shocked. And I think both of us were much higher on this team than most people in the national spotlight. And frankly, even at the local level, I think we're a big reason why they are still soaring so high and why they've continued to win even while losing Jaden Ivey is, one, Cade Cunningham is an all-star and maybe an all-NBA player. He has just been that good. It was incredible for me to be getting texts from Knicks fans, friends of mine that live in the city, and them just going, in the second quarter, I don't know, even while the Knicks are up, just going like, I don't know, Cade's been too quiet. I think you guys are going to win this one. And if you had told me I'd be getting texts like that this year after last year, I would not have believed you. But it really is the case. And you're talking about a guy who has just been on an absolute hot streak. He was the best player in the Garden. He continues to outplay superstars everywhere he goes. I mean, we're talking about now the resume he's built up. He's outplayed LeBron James twice. He's outplayed Anthony Edwards. He's outplayed Jalen Brunson twice in Madison Square Garden. He's outplayed Kevin Durant. He's outplayed Stephen Curry. I mean, the list continues on. But the reason why they're not just treading water with Cade, but they're actually winning is because the other guys have been stepping up as well. And the number one guy, and I believe, Aaron, this is something that will be germane to you as you wrote an article about this, Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris has really, really stepped up as of late. Since Jaden Ivey went down against the Orlando Magic, Tobias Harris is averaging 15 and a half points a game, 7 rebounds per game, 3 assists, which is pretty good for him. And he's doing it all while shooting 52% from the floor, 48% from 3, 95% from the line. The guy is just on fire right now, and they've needed that. 100%. They have needed him to step up. They've needed the supporting cast to step up. You've had Asar Thompson putting in some absolutely hellacious work on the defensive end of things. You have Tim Hardaway Jr., as he so eloquently put it in that post that went a little bit viral, swing the ball, find the open man. And of course, you have Malik Beasley, who hit 2 gigantic threes against the New York Knicks to put them up in order to win that game. they're playing with a swagger, Aaron. That's really the thing I'm seeing too. It's not just the box score stuff, right? It's the camaraderie, it's the leadership, it's all of that stuff. That's what's making them win.
I got to give a shout out to, as you're giving out all these shout outs to the various players who all deserve it. I have to give one to someone that I didn't expect to have an impact on this team the way that he has this year. And that's Ron Holland.
JB.
Oh,
I thought you were going to say JB. All right. Sorry.
I got to go Ron Holland here because this is a guy that, quite frankly, like I wrote about it, is a player that I would have stayed away from if I were the Pistons heading into the draft. You know, I just looked at his archetype and I looked at what Detroit had on the roster on the time, and I didn't see the exact need for him considering some of the other players that were likely to be available when Detroit was on the clock at 14 or 5. I'm remembering where Ron Holland was projected to go, like in several different mock drafts, but at 5, and I just didn't think Holland made a whole lot of sense. But credit to him and credit to the team and the JB Bickerstaff for figuring out the best way to utilize him and feed off of him because he's been excellent this year. You know, you'd love him to be shooting 35, 38% from 3-point line. And even though that's not the case, he's still helping this team so much on a nightly basis. It's the energy that he brings. It's the defensive intensity that he brings. It's the ability to finish at the rim. It's the ability, you know, to just bring that attitude that this team is really starting to kind of build an identity under. Like they're building that defensive identity, but even more so, they're building that identity of like they're going to be very tough. They're going to be very physical. They're not going to back down from everyone or anyone. And it's the type of mentality that I think this organization has said they want to be every year. Oh, we want to get back to that old Detroit Piston championship style gritty basketball. And it's not really happened until this year for them. And that's Isaiah Stewart. That's Ron Holland. That's Jalen Duren. Like that's those guys, you know, not taking any shit, you know, taking exception to when teams or players go at them. And I think it's really helped this team because it brings that competitive level up for them. It keeps them focused. It keeps them energized. And I think Ron Holland has played a massive part in that. So I have to give him a ton of credit as we're giving these shout outs. That being said, we haven't even gotten into our first actual topic that we have written down on the show notes this week. So I think we should get into that because we're talking about how well the Pistons are playing and how well everything's going and how well all these guys on the roster are playing. Well, we have some new reports coming out, and this dates back to when Trajan Langdon took over as the Pistons general manager, and the Pistons went through free agency and kept some cap space available and kept their roster spot open. The reports throughout that time were that Langdon was doing that to be player in the trade market, being able to take on dead salary, bad contracts, along with draft capital to add to the Pistons' asset cupboard. And it seems like with the way the Pistons have played, they might be shifting away from that strategy. I mean, Trajan Langdon, the Pistons president of basketball operations, said it the other day. This is a quote from him. Quote, "You know we're definitely ahead of schedule. I don't think any of us expected to be above 500 at this point in the season, but we're not getting overly excited. We're very happy about the success we've had, but we've got a long way to go." Now, that quote runs along with a report that we've gotten that the Pistons and Langdon have maybe shifted their plans for the trade deadline, which is just 3 weeks away on February 6th, to be not as much of a seller, but more of a buyer in the market. And the Pistons have the ability to do that considering the cap space that they have. They are the only team in the NBA with cap space. They have an open roster spot to work with as well. And they have some contracts that they can move to help facilitate trades. Now, I wrote about it today on palaceofpistons.com, how the Pistons, you know, should manage the trade market. Should they be going star hunting? Are they maybe looking at some smaller moves around the edges of the roster to kind of even things out, add some depth? I guess, Jasper, let's start there with this report that the strategy might be changing. Like, how much of buyers should the Pistons be? Like, should they be willing to go into trade discussions for guys like Zach LaVine or Brandon Ingram, knowing that it could cost them trade, young assets or draft picks down the line? Or should they maybe be staying out of those type of discussions? I know Zion Williamson's another name, Cameron Johnson another name, that have been talked about as like those upper echelon guys in the trade market this year. Where are you at with that?
Well, this is very similar to something we talked about last week, and I'm glad that the Pistons actually addressed it because we, on this very podcast, discussed should the Pistons be buyers, as it was looking like they might be in that kind of position. And now it appears as if they've had those same discussions and they've kind of come down on the same side we have, which is, yes, they should be buying at the deadline. They have $14.5 million to play with in cap room. No other team in the NBA does. So they are in a buyer's market in the best position to buy of any team. I will still come down on the same side as I did last week, though. I don't think they should be making, unless it is for, and really of all the guys you've thrown out there, Zion Williamson is probably the only one that I would really take that big swing at. But Jimmy Butler, Bradley Beal, Bradley Beal already said he's not coming to Detroit.
Hey, let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Bradley Beal has indicated that he does not want to be traded to a rebuilding team like the Detroit Pistons.
And great news, I don't want him either. So I think we can wash our hands clear of that one.
I remember when the Bradley Beal trade stuff started, I apologize for cutting you off, but I remember when the Bradley Beal trade stuff started and people were like, oh, maybe the Pistons should absorb that contract. And I was just sitting there like, absolutely the hell not. That would be a terrible.
What would they even gain from that? Like, what on earth would you gain from that? It's not like the Suns can give you a first-round pick to get off of that salary. Like, they just traded them. So,
oh, yes, absolutely devastated that Bradley Beal does not want to be a Detroit Piston. Just have to clear the air there.
Shucks. No, I just, that to me, that doesn't move me. Even like, yeah, Jimmy Butler, an aging star, does not move me whatsoever. I just don't think the Pistons are in that kind of a position to where they can be pushing in. This is a discussion we had a couple years ago when the Cleveland Cavaliers traded for Donovan Mitchell. And we said, look, eventually it's going to come a day where the Pistons have to push all in order to take that next step. They're going to have to make a trade for an established star. It will happen at some point. They're not at that place yet. They still have too many things, in my opinion, to figure out this offseason in regards to Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren's possible extensions, figuring out what you're going to do there. You have too many holes, I think, still in too many places to have one star come along and be the answer. Look at the Philadelphia 76ers. That's like a perfect example of what happens when you have stars but no depth on your team. And the Pistons are not in a position where they can be trading away what little depth they do have right now in order to get a guy who's probably ultimately not going to make that much of a difference because you're not going to have the secondary players who can step in and fill roles. Yeah, it's, again, look at Philly. Like, wow, you have Paul George, you have Joel Embiid, you have Tyrese Maxey. Who's your backup point guard? The corpse of Kyle Lowry? Who's your backup center? The corpse of Andre Drummond? Like, you can't be in that kind of a position if you're the Pistons. And so for that reason, I go back to essentially the kind of package that I threw out there last week, which was look at a team like the Kings, see if you could get like a Keon Ellis, see if you can get a Kevin Huerter from them. Go around, pick up depth. I still think you need a backup power forward. As much as a good of a job as I think JB Bickerstaff has done with Ron Holland and Asar Thompson's minutes and putting them at a myriad of positions, that's been great. But I just think you have so much, you still need a backup power forward. You still need a backup shooting guard, really a starting shooting guard, because I think the Pistons are at their best when Malik Beasley comes off the bench. So as of right now, if I'm the Pistons, I am buying, but I'm also looking at how I can find value by buying. And I don't think you need to give up the farm in order to acquire a decent piece. Think John Collins from the Hawks to the Jazz a couple years ago, where they basically just salary dumped him. Still a useful enough player. Even something like Dennis Schroeder or Dorian Finney-Smith. Those are guys that went for second round picks. Not very much. So I think you can get reasonably significantly better at the deadline without giving up too much. And you certainly cannot give up any picks.
Yeah, I'm really in full agreement with you. It's like, you look at the assets that the Pistons have when it comes to trying to trade for a star, an all-star level player, and it's like you go down the list. Obviously, Cade Cunningham's not getting dealt. I don't think you're trading Jaden Ivey just because he got hurt. I don't think this team's really interested in moving off of either of Asar Thompson or Ron Holland. Jalen Duren, I know he's had ups and downs this year, and we've also talked before about where his trade value is at. I don't know if he's good enough to get you a high level piece. And then you look at the picks, right? The Pistons can't trade their first round pick until 2028 unless it conveys, which right now it looks like it might convey this year with all of the protections that it's had dating back to the Isaiah Stewart trade, a la Troy Weaver era. And then after that, so you go back to your first round picks in 2029 and 2030 and 2031. And it's like, does it make sense to use those right now in a trade? And I just don't think it does. I just, you look at what you've gone through these past years, not having a first round pick at your disposal because of moving it and protecting it and locking it up for all these years. It's like, you don't want to find yourself in a similar situation again when it looks like that pick you traded, whatever it was 5 years ago, might finally convey. So I just don't think the Pistons need to chase after a star of that caliber if it's going to cost them money. Even if the Bulls really just wanted to dump Zach LaVine, which I don't think is their plan right now, considering how well he's playing. I just don't know if the Pistons are a team that should be doing that. So I'm in agreement. I think they should be looking at smaller deals. For me, I've said it since the offseason. I've said it in my article today. I think they need to get another point guard on the roster. I think Chicago could be a trade partner for that. They have Lonzo Ball, Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Javon Carter, Ayo
Dosunmu.
You're telling me you can't get one of those guys? Because one of those guys would really help you. I think you're right in saying they need another four. They need a floor spacing four, another offensive-minded four. That's something I wrote in my piece that dropped on Wednesday as well. It's like Cameron Johnson's obviously like that ideal target for that, but with the Nets wanting at least one, likely 2 first-round picks for him, the Pistons are just not players for that. If the Nets really wanted, I don't know. I don't know what the Pistons have that they'd be willing to give up to go get someone like Cam Johnson. So,
well, Aaron, that's also partially why I'm like, I think they should be going out and getting, smaller-ish contracts that are for a couple years because, like we said, like they don't have a lot of guys that they can really afford to move off of unless they're getting players back. And I think the only way that you can appreciate assets in the meantime is by making those kind of salary dump-ish trades. Like the rich man's version of what Troy Weaver was trying to do with like Frank Jackson and Josh Jackson and all these reclamation projects. Like you need to get guys that maybe have a lower value around the league right now. It's exactly what Trajan did in the offseason. Like he went out, he got Tobias Harris. He went out, he got Malik Beasley. He went out, the Tim Hardaway Jr. thing, they got picks back. And that was kind of like a salary dump-ish. But ultimately,
I have no issue with that Tim Hardaway Jr. trade. I know a lot of people are upset about that. It's something we've talked about, dating back to the summer as well. It's like, yes, Quentin Grimes is playing well in Dallas, but just being honest with you, there wasn't a future for him in Detroit. He did not want to be in Detroit. There's something to be said about getting a guy in Tim Hardaway Jr. that is obviously giving Detroit really good minutes. He's played a key role in this winning streak for this team. He's also a veteran. He's also very well respected. He has that experience of playing in big games. He has that experience of playing off of a star point guard like Luka Doncic, now with Cade Cunningham. Like maybe Grimes, player to player, skill to skill, is a better player than Tim Hardaway Jr. But for what Tim Hardaway Jr. has brought to this team, looking at Grimes also needing a payday, not wanting to be here, and getting 3 second-round picks included in that trade, just want to go on the record that even now with Grimes playing as well as he has, I just don't get all of the people up in arms in that deal, especially with like Tim Hardaway Jr. has been rock solid this year. Has he had a few weeks of bad shooting? Yeah, but we knew that's what we were getting in Tim Hardaway Jr. Every team knows that a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr. is a little streaky, but those guys still get paid $12, $15 million a year because of the skill that they have. And Tim Hardaway Jr. has been a very valuable piece for the Pistons this year.
I'm so glad you actually mentioned that up, because that was the final point I was going to make, which is this is something I think the Pistons should take into account when they are looking at the trade market. A big reason why this team has been successful is chemistry and that camaraderie that they have with each other. And then, I said earlier, you brought up Ron Holland, and I thought you were going to say JP Bickerstaff, because I think he has played such a huge role in what this team has become. Like, these guys fight for each other. You have a team of guys that are not especially defensively talented, like obviously Ron, Asar, Stewart, Cade. Those are all good defenders. I wouldn't say anybody else on this roster is somebody that would be looked at as a plus defender. Like they're at best an average at their position guy, but they're playing really, really good defense right now. And that's because they have bought in. And I think that is something you have to at least keep in the back of your mind if you're Trajan Langdon when you look at this trade deadline. Is like, yeah, you want to upgrade your talent, of course, but you need to make sure that you're still going to maintain that team chemistry. And one thing that JB Bickerstaff does so well, and I think it's something that's caused this buy-in, you've heard multiple players even discuss it, is him talking to refs during the game. He is always talking to refs. He is always arguing calls. Sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. It doesn't matter, because the players know that he is going to fight for them. And it makes them want to fight for each other. And especially when you've got guys like Holland and Stewart on the floor who will actually fight for you, that helps a lot too. So when I look at this, I think that they've built something that's bigger than the sum of its parts as of right now. And it's just something I think that they should think about when they approach this trade deadline is, yes, get better, but don't screw with the chemistry too much. You have a good thing going here,
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, that was the point I was trying to make in my post. I know I'm referring to it again. This is a great reminder to go to palaceofpistons.com and subscribe so you get the posts that I make or that Mike makes, or that Jasper makes. Get them sent directly to you, directly to your email inbox, free of charge. I mean, please go over there.
I've goosebumps, Aaron. That mid-show plug, I've goosebumps right now.
Only the best of the best can get this in, but it's again something that I wrote about in my piece, like the chemistry. This is real. Like, the locker room is in its healthiest state that we've seen it in, dating back to probably when, the Pistons had Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond, and it was that year they made the playoffs with those two, Tobias Harris, Marcus Morris, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Like, this is the healthiest state that it's been in. This has been a revolving door for players, for coaches. Like, it is valuable to have some stability. It is valuable to have some continuity. It is valuable to have players that you like, you trust, and you're continuing to build that trust with. I mean, God, you can point to that video of Tim Hardaway Jr. walking through the Madison Square Garden after the game. Extra pass, find the hot man. Like, he trusts his team. And Tim Hardaway Jr., like, I'm not saying he has a reputation of a selfish player, but he definitely has that reputation of a guy that wants to get his shots up a bit. And it's like, he was pretty open, and you couldn't have argued with him if he took that shot. But he waited, he got the defense to bite in, and he made the extra pass to Malik Beasley. Like, that kind of stuff, looking at it from a fan perspective, looking at it from a teammate perspective, looking at it from a coaching perspective, like, all of that stuff matters. And so it's like, I'd imagine as a front office, you're looking at that too. And everything that we've seen from Trajan Langdon indicates he's aware of how this all works. And so I think he values that as well. And I agree. Like, the Pistons have to value the chemistry they have. You trade 2-3 guys out of that locker room, especially guys that are veterans or are playing a lot of minutes. Like, you're going to maybe not ruin it, but it is going to change that dynamic inside of a locker room that for so long has just needed this. Like, the vibes in there are so strong. And not to compare it to the Lions, because it feels like that's what we do with every Detroit sports team right now. but it just feels like they're getting like that Lions type of energy, and
there's buy-in. There's buy-in. Like Dan Campbell's second year. This reminds me so much of that, where yeah, the Lions barely missed out on the playoffs, but you could see there was buy-in in that locker room and that they were going to take a step the next season. There was no way they weren't. Like, and it's so frustrating to a certain extent because this is something we talked about 2 years now, where we were like, you need to get vets who are like bought into what you're trying to build here. Like, and you see exactly why. And people, I've seen people go like, well, Bojan Bogdanovic is like a good player. Burks, like, here's a veteran, Joe Harris. Those guys didn't want to be here. Didn't want to be here. Okay. And even if they did, like, dude, Isaiah Stewart would be getting into a scrap, and you have Bojan Bogdanovic walking away, like rolling his eyes. You have, I will never forget this as long as I live. Alec Burks, when they set the single season losing streak record at 28 games, him walking off the court laughing. I'll never ever forget that. That was when I went, oh, you got to get rid of all of these guys. You can't have any of them on there. Can you imagine in a million years this team, I'm talking this team, forget 28 games, going on a 10-game losing streak, and at the end of that, any of them walking off the court laughing and smiling? Absolutely not. There is no way they'd even let it get to that point. And so, yeah, I just think, and we'll move on to our next topic, but I really do think that you have to take into consideration how much the emotional aspect of sports does bleed over into the results on the floor. It does bleed over into the box score. Like Tobias Harris stepping up exactly when Jaden Ivey goes down. To me, that's not a coincidence. That's a guy saying, they brought me in here to be the number 3 guy behind Cade and Jaden Ivey. Now the number 2 guy went down. Great. I'm number 2 right now, and it's time for me to step up. And guess what? He did. Like, he has been stepping up. Like he said, Tim Hardaway Jr., not known to be the most willing of passers, but he made the pass because he knew it was the right play, and he trusted his teammate. So, yeah, I really cannot say enough about the character of this team and how integral I think it's going to be in them getting to the playoffs. Because like we said, they're very close right now. We discussed last week, the schedule leading up to the All-Star break is fairly favorable. But if you look at what happens after the All-Star break, it gets a lot tougher. It gets a lot tougher. And you're ending the season on a very, very, very difficult stretch. I mean, the Pistons, like their last few games, just really quickly, and then we'll move on. Let's see. I mean, last few games of the season, they go on a 3-game road trip against the Timberwolves, Thunder, and Raptors. That's a winnable game, but those other 2 are very tough. And then after the Raptors, you come home on a back-to-back against the Grizzlies. Then you face the Kings. Then you face the Knicks, and you have 2 games against the Bucks to finish the season. So they're going to have some very, very real adversity at the end of this. They need to be locked in, but they also need to have the depth. It's going to be a definite tightrope for Trajan Langdon to walk.
No doubt. No doubt. I think this is a good time to move on to our next topic. And we're just talking more about Cade Cunningham. I mean, spectacular season for him. He is really starting now, though, to gain the national spotlight across the entire league. As the Pistons have won more and more, and Cade Cunningham has continued to put up just the incredible stat lines that he has. The talks have shifted from, is Cade going to be an all-star? Is he going to sneak onto the team? To, is Cade about to make an all-NBA team? And there's even been some very, very beginning discussions of Cade Cunningham deserves to be in the MVP race. On top of that, Cade Cunningham was brought on to NBA Today on Wednesday, did a segment with Malika Andrews talking about the Pistons, their winning ways, how much fun he's having, what this group is feeling right now, what's led to this reformed Detroit basketball team. JB Bickerstaff was getting some national attention. He was on a FanDuel show, I believe, doing a segment and an interview with them. He's plus 2,500 to win Coach of the Year. on Bet Online. You could bet Cade Cunningham at -130 to win Most Improved Player of the Year. He is the odds-on favorite to win that award currently. Man, the spotlight though on Cade Cunningham on the Detroit Pistons. It's not something that we have seen in Detroit in a very, very long time. There was spotlight on this team last year, but obviously for all of the wrong reasons. Does it kind of feel like the Pistons and Cade Cunningham are becoming like the NBA's darling almost? I mean, the hype that they're getting right now nationally is exceeding what the attention is locally right now.
Not to bring it back to the Lions, but I gotta again. Real second year of Dan Campbell's tenure vibes, where you started to see the national media start to pay a little bit of attention to what was going on and starting to hype up some of the players that the Lions had. It very much feels like that. And Aaron, I think we're at the point where you're going to see Pistons well inside the top 10 for 4 different awards. I think you're going to see JB Bickerstaff top 5 in Coach of the Year voting, are probably top 3. Same goes for Malik Beasley with 6 Man of the Year. I think he's almost a lock to finish top 3 there. If I was voting for it right now, it'd be neck and neck between him and Peyton Pritchard. I don't even really know who else you could make an argument for. And then Cade Cunningham, in my opinion, is going to be getting votes for both Most Improved and for MVP this year. If the Pistons finish inside of the top 6 seeds in the East, I don't see how he couldn't get MVP votes. Like how could you not give that guy? Look at the roster. look at the roster he has. That's a guy who should at least be getting MVP votes, even if he's not quite at that upper echelon. So quite a turnaround in terms of the hype that the Pistons are getting. I mean, again, last year people were tuning in to see this team lose. Now they're starting to tune in because people are realizing that this is one of the most entertaining teams in the entire NBA to watch. I mean, like banger after banger, Aaron. We have been spoiled this year. But not just that, but Cade Cunningham is a very unique star. He's the kind of guy that there's not a lot of them in the NBA this year. I mean, I think of him, I think of Luka, Jokic. That's kind of it. Like those dudes who just play at their own pace, don't blow you away with their athleticism. But the difference between him and them, he has a very different game. Like Cade is more of a passer than Luka is. Obviously, Luka is an incredible passer. He can dribble and run in transition, I think, in a way that Jokic and Doncic don't. Again, Jokic also incredible in transition, but it's a different style. There's just not a lot of guards out there who play with the way that he does. And I think a lot of those dudes who usually do, like your Hardens, your Lukas, they kind of tend to be like free throw merchants. Cade isn't that. The dude just gets in the lane, fills up the bucket, kicks it out to the open man, hits his pull-up threes. Like he is the ethical hooper. And as more and more people are tuning in to watch these games, they're noticing this is a fun team to watch. This guy rocks. I had multiple people texting me who are Knicks fans just going, man, Cade Cunningham is so good. That guy's awesome. I wish I could watch Cade play. Like, that's where you're at right now. So, yes, I don't even think there's anything to discuss when it comes to the all-star thing. He's an all-star, period. I think we're both in agreement on that, yes? My question to you would be, Aaron, like, do you think he's all NBA? Do you think he's getting MVP votes when it's all said and done?
Well, firstly, I just have to laugh a little bit at you calling Cade Cunningham a quote unquote hooper. I thought that was reserved for Jalen Green.
Ethical hooper. Jalen Green is not. He's a hashtag real hooper.
You're not the first person that has talked to me about Cade Cunningham being like a very ethical basketball player, and I agree because it's like he's not a free throw merchant. Like, plays the game on both sides of the floor, plays it at all 3 levels on offense. You know, does everything on the court. Like, gets to the rim, does the shooting, does the passing. really, really improved defender this year. He obviously does the rebounding, these 7 triple doubles this year. Like he does it all. And one other point I'll make about him, which is rarer and rarer these days in the NBA, is Cade has given no indication of like the diva-ness that we see in a lot of, it's not even just stars in the league nowadays. It's just players overall. The diva-ness in the NBA. I mean, you think it guys like Zion Williamson, who's just really had a disappointing career, and you look at all of the attitude issues and things like that, and it's like obviously Anthony Edwards is a spectacular player, but has a little bit of that diva side to him. You look at guys like Jimmy Butler quitting on his team again in the middle of the season. Like there's some diva stuff there. Like Cade Cunningham just goes out there, he plays basketball. He's not going online and tweeting or Instagram living and saying, blaming teammates or quitting on his team and, not playing in games. Like the dude just goes out there, plays basketball, and that's pretty much all you hear from him. Like doesn't do a ton of media. So like him doing all this media stuff as of late is like the most we've seen of him probably since he was drafted, by the team years ago. So Cade is very, very ethical. And to get to your question, like, yeah, I mean, look, you also got to take into effect like guys have to play 65 games to be eligible for an award like All NBA or for MVP. And like Luka Doncic, he just lost that consideration because of how much time he's missed. How many other guys who would be vying with Cade Cunningham for those votes, assuming Cade Cunningham gets the 65 games played this year, how many of those guys that would battle for him and he would lose votes to, how many of those guys are going to actually be eligible? How many guys are going to drop out of consideration? So, look, I think you look at the numbers. Cade Cunningham has statistically been not just, one of the best players in the Eastern Conference, not just one of the best guards in the Eastern Conference. He's not just been one of the best guards in the NBA. He's been one of the best players in the NBA, period. So I think he's totally deserving of getting that respect in the voting if he continues to play at this level. If the Pistons continue to win, like the Pistons slide back into 10 or 11 and miss the playoffs or miss the play-in, like I just don't think voters are going to get behind him in that regard. But the Pistons are winning right now, and they're doing it largely because of the insane statistical performances that Cade Cunningham is putting up on a nightly basis. So,
I mean, Aaron
deserves it 100%.
Aaron, 4th in the NBA in total points created. Cade Cunningham, like. Only people ahead of him are Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I believe it may be LeBron as well. I actually cannot remember the third, but he is in rarefied air and, 4th in usage. The guy is just carrying a tremendous load for this team right now. And yeah, absolutely. If they keep winning, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't see how you could not give him some MVP votes. He's like most valuable to your team. If you're carrying the team in every facet, like I think you have to kind of be in that consideration for most valuable player. The one, I've seen him linked to that I get, but I don't think he's going to win is most improved. Like, I guess I understand why people put him in that conversation. That being said, I think Norman Powell, and it's so weird to say this about a 31-year-old, Norman Powell is the most improved player this year. Like, I don't see how you could not give it to him. He's averaging 10 more points per game than he did last year on like 7 more minutes played, shooting 48, 43, 84 from the free throw line. I just think you have to give it to Norman Powell this year, even though that feels odd. I definitely think Cade should be in that discussion. Like, he just hasn't taken so much of a statistical leap that I think you could be like, oh, yeah, he deserves it. I just think most improved is, frankly, kind of a stupid award in general, but, yeah.
I'm just of the principle that, like, a number 1 pick, a number 2 pick, like, unless they're just, like, really bad for their first year or two in the league, like, I just don't think the most improved player of the year award is really meant for them. Like, I think it's more meant for someone like Norman Powell, like a guy that was drafted at least, he's at least got to be like late lottery. Like,
I mean, John Morant won it a few years ago.
I know, but like, I just don't think that that's an award that they should really win. Like they're top draft picks. Like, and it's not like John Morant or it's not like Cade Cunningham was like bad last year or like, yes, Cade Cunningham has been better this year, but like he was still pretty good last year and he was pretty good his rookie year. So it's like, I don't know. Like I get it. He's definitely much improved, but it feels like the spirit of this award is meant for a specific segment of NBA players.
I guess so, but at the other hand, like after all the slander Cade has had to put up with over the years, like yeah, we know that he played pretty well last year, but how much slander did you see? Like, okay, here's how I guess I'd look at it. ESPN had what? Cade as the 66th best player in the NBA this year.
That's fair.
He's got to be inside the top 17 next year. Like you almost have to imagine he's probably top 15 next year. If you take a 50 spot jump, like, and it's not like a small jump, like you're the 400th and now you're the 350th best player in the NBA. Like, no, you're going from like, oh, this guy has potential, could be good to like, oh no, this guy's a star, like he's all NBA. I don't know. For me, there's a narrative thing that I would like about that because I guess I would also kind of not like him not to win it just for like, it's just in the face of the nerds because you had so many people slandering him for so long. I mean, God, dude, Josh Giddey. How many people were like, I think Kevin Pelton was like, I'd take Josh Giddey over like Jalen Suggs. Get out of here, man.
I just think like for him, I'd be way more concerned about getting the All-Star votes, getting the All-NBA votes, sneaking into that top 5 of the MVP votes. Like I would just be way more concerned and I think personally, like if it were me, like I'd be way prouder of any of those than I would be of MIP, considering like I know how good I've been. I know like a lot of this is just the national recognition that we're getting this year because yes, of me, but also because like the team is actually winning games. I don't know. Like I'm not gonna sit here and be like, oh, you're a loser if you think a number 1 or number 2 pick should win MIP. Like it's not that big of a deal. I just think for me, I think it's more for a certain segment of players, but I get it. He's the betting.
The award's dumb in general. Like, can we agree on that? At least it's a dumb award.
Of these guys that are drafted in the top 5 winning the award. So it's not like it would be unprecedented for him to win it. So if the history, the base has been set for those type of guys to win it. So by all means, he deserves to be in the running based off that.
Aaron, I think Cade himself kind of put it best when it comes to all these awards, when it comes to these honors. He said it in his interview with Malika Andrews. If you win, the rest of it takes care of itself. All you got to do is keep winning, and everything else will fall into place. It's really just that simple. All the Pistons have to do is keep winning. And at the end of the year, you're going to see Cade Cunningham and a couple other guys from this team up there in the awards voting where they'll rightfully belong. Yeah, I really do think it's as simple as that at the end of the day. So I'm very, very excited to see what happens. It will be really cool to have the Pistons have somebody in the All-Star game again. It's been brought up many times, but like Blake Griffin was the last one. Before that, it was Andre Drummond. And before that, it was Allen Iverson. Like, that's the last 15 years of All-Stars for this team. 3 guys. That's it. So where they're at right now is so much better. And yeah, I really cannot wait to see how that all shakes out. It does seem inevitable at this point that Cade Cunningham will be playing for the East in the All-Star game this year.
Moving into just kind of this last brief topic, that schedule ahead for the Detroit Pistons. They've got Indiana on Thursday, which is a really big game when you take into account where Indiana's at in the standings, same division, so you start looking at tiebreakers. Really big game against Indiana. Then the Suns are in town on Saturday before the Lions playoff game. That game got moved up to 4 o'clock. I think it was originally scheduled for 5. So they got a 4 o'clock home game against the Suns. Then they play Monday in Houston. They've got Atlanta, who's another team kind of jockeying for playoff position in the Eastern Conference. Orlando, who Detroit's only a game and a half behind right now for the 4th seed, follows that. And then they go into to the last week of January. They get Cleveland, Indiana, Dallas, who Kyrie's back playing for them. I'm not sure what Luka's status is, but and I know that's another 2 weeks. He could be back by then. So this rest of January, it's pretty much all playoff caliber teams. It's not an easy schedule for the Detroit Pistons. I think this is a really, really telling stretch. And not that it is separated from the games that they've already played, and obviously they've won. I mean, they just beat the Nets, or excuse me, they just beat the Knicks in Madison Square Garden. So they're clearly up for the challenge, but there's no like you look at the schedule, it's like, oh, they've got Toronto. Like, no, they've got playoff caliber teams and star level players pretty much every night the rest of the month.
Definitely. But even then, like you look at it, this is kind of the easiest stretch. Like this is about as easy as it's going to get. I mean, obviously, like Pacers, Suns, yeah, that 5-game road stretch is going to be very tough. That's going to be really difficult. And I think it's really crucial for them to win both of these next 2 home games. One Thursday, one Saturday. They really got to win those games because if you go into this 5-game road stretch against the Rockets, Hawks, Magic, Cavs, and Pacers, there is no guarantee that you're going to win any of those games. Let's be real. Like there is a very good chance that you come out of that 5-game road stretch and you're back under 500 again. It's not outside the realm of possibility. Yes, you're lucky. You get a little easier stretch after that, but like I really need people to realize after the All-Star break, this is going to be really tough. The Pistons have a really, really tough go of it coming out of the All-Star break. They start on the road against the Spurs and Hawks. Then they come home. They got the Clippers, Celtics, Nuggets, like back like a 3 in a row against that. That's brutal. Then you get the Nets. That's great. And you go on a 4-game road stretch again. You're facing the Jazz, Clippers, Warriors, and Blazers. You'd think you come out of that 500, but the Pistons never win in Utah. Like that's an automatic loss. So there's a good chance you only win the Portland game there. Like things could go off the rails very, very quickly. And while I'm very happy about where the Pistons are now, while I don't see this team mentally folding like that, I think that is why they have to be extremely pertinent at the trade deadline in the moves that they choose to make, but also the moves that they choose not to make, because this team's going to have to hold together. They're going to have some adversity coming up.
Yeah, I think this is where you really start to see like how real this is. Like how real is this ability to compete every single night with the Detroit Pistons, because the schedule doesn't get easier. It's going to be tough. They're going to be playing good teams, but like to be fair, they've beaten good teams this year. They've beaten really good teams this year, and they've also lost to really bad teams. Like right before this win streak for Detroit, they lost at home to Utah, who was playing without several key players. So it's like you could sit here and you can play the schedule game and you can plan out scheduled wins, you can plan out scheduled losses, but like the Pistons, for the Pistons at least, they've proven that really doesn't apply to them, at least this year, because they've lost games to teams that if you look at the schedule, you expect that and you plan it to be a win. And then they've beaten teams where you look at it and you're going in, you're saying, all right, well, there's no way they're going to win this game, but maybe the next game when they play so-and-so, they'll have a better shot. So, yeah, this is where we're going to start to see like how real this is for the Pistons. And I think you have to give them some credit and say, hey, they have played these teams very, very tough. They've beaten some of the best teams in the league. So we have to give them that respect. But with the trade deadline looming, it'll also be interesting to see, how the rest of January goes. How does that impact what Trajan Langdon does? Which is where we started the top of the show is the Pistons are winning right now, shifting momentum towards being more of buyers at the trade deadline. How aggressive does Trajan Langdon get? Does this team go on a 2, 3, 4-game skid and Langdon decides, okay, you know what, this wasn't as real as maybe we thought it was. We've got to go back into our mindset of just taking on some dead salary cap and assets, or does he actually say, you know what, we're 2 or 3, 4-game skid, but we're close. Like we just need a little bit of a boost. And then he goes out and purchases something that really helps this team. So, man, we say this every year, and it's been this way with the Pistons because Troy Weaver was very active every deadline. But it's going to be a really interesting trade deadline for the Detroit Pistons because they could really go one way or the other. We just don't know yet. Like it's these next few weeks are going to be very, very telling for the direction the rest of the season for this team.
And Aaron, I think it's worth noting again that the Pistons do have $14.5 million in cap space. Nobody else is closer than $3 million above the tax of the salary cap. So they're the only team that has this excess cap space to work with. They can do both. That's also the thing that I think people need to take into consideration here. The Pistons can do both. They can make a trade and they can also eat salary. So don't be surprised if they make a couple of moves. One of them is just to acquire some assets. And if one of them is to actually acquire somebody that is going to be a real contributor to this team down the stretch. I will say, looking at the schedule, yes, it's going to be tough after the All-Star break. But the great thing about this team this year is you're not looking at the schedule and going, well, that's an automatic loss. That's an automatic loss. That's an automatic loss. Except for the Utah game. That one's an automatic loss. They don't win in Salt Lake City, guys. It does not happen, man. It doesn't matter how good they are or how bad the Jazz are. They don't win those games. But other than that, like, you know, there's a couple games that, like last year, you felt confident. Like they faced Washington, you went, okay, they can win this game. But there's no games this year. I remember distinctly, Aaron, coming on the podcast, you know, when they were like 10 games into that losing streak and looking at the schedule, you and I together and going, oh no, they don't have a winnable game for another 10 games. They don't have another winnable game for 15 games. Oh no. And like you could count those losses as just being there. You had no hope. Now, at the very least, regardless of how the trade deadline shakes out, regardless of how the end of the season shakes out, I do feel confident that this team is not mentally going to fold. They're going to continue to play competitive games. And regardless of where they are in the standings at the end of the year, I don't see them crumbling. I see them at least staying where they are in terms of the production that they're putting up on the floor. Nothing about this feels wholly unsustainable. Right. And if they can get Jaden Ivey back, if they can pull off a trade, I really think you could see them not just sneaking into the playoffs, but potentially being on an upward trajectory going in.
I haven't listened to it yet. I started the show, but I haven't gotten to the segment that they did on the Detroit Pistons. But Brian Windhorst made some sort of inclination that on his podcast, on his show, The Hoop Collective, that he wouldn't rule out Jaden Ivey for the year just yet. I know there have been some conflicting reports as to Ivey's availability for the remainder of the season. The Pistons have not applied for the disabled player contract or protection, whatever the official name is, for Jaden Ivey. So that alone tells me that there's some hope that he could be back at some point this season. But like I said, we've seen some conflicting reports. We've seen he's done for the year. We've seen he could be back in, 8 weeks, 7 weeks. We've seen, before the end of the regular season, maybe by the playoffs. So we've seen it all with him. It's really just going to come down to, do you get an official report from one of the top beat writers or top national reporters, or do the Pistons come out and give an official time frame on Ivey's return? I think that's really all it comes down to on that.
I'll say this I don't have anything that hasn't been said already. If they go to the playoffs, he will play. I'll put money on it. Like if they are in the playoffs, Jaden Ivey will be back this year. It's a broken leg, man. Like it's the same thing as like Aiden Hutchinson. It matters where you are at that point in the season. They're not going to rush him back if they don't have to. But I feel very, very confident that Jaden Ivey can recover from a clean fracture in under 5 months, under 4 months. I think he can do it. So we'll see. I could be wrong, but I'd put money on it.
Well, this has been a jam-packed edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. If you enjoyed anything that you heard today, do us a huge favor. Go hit the like button. Go hit the subscribe button. Go leave us a 5-star rating. Go leave us a comment wherever you're watching or listening to today's show from. If you're listening on YouTube, you're listening on Spotify, you're listening on Apple Podcasts, we really, really, really need your support. So go show us some love. Allow us to continue to do this show each week. Allow us to continue to grow. This has been a lot of fun. As always, it's been a blast, but it feels a little different right now with the state of the Detroit Pistons and the national media really starting to get behind this team. The national spotlight really starting to grow on this team. It's been, a really, really good time to be around the Detroit Pistons in this basketball team. So that is going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you all next week.